I watched through my living room window as two women in matching polo shirts with HOA badges wrestled my mailbox out of the ground. And I knew right then that my Tuesday morning in Scottsdale, Arizona was about to get a whole lot more complicated. My name is Patrick Vance, and I had been living in the Saguaro Springs subdivision for exactly 3 months. The neighborhood was one of those pristine Arizona communities where every house looked like it had been photoshopped into existence with its beige stucco walls and terracotta roof tiles. The HOA here ran things with an iron fist, but I figured as long as I kept my lawn green and my trash cans hidden, I would be fine. I was wrong. The mailbox they were currently hauling into the back of a white pickup truck was the same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house. It was a standard black metal post with a matching black box. Nothing fancy, nothing weird. I had assumed it was HOA approved since the previous owners had it installed. Apparently, I had assumed wrong. I threw open my front door and jogged across the lawn in my bare feet, still holding my coffee mug. The heat of the concrete immediately made me regret not putting on shoes, but I was too annoyed to care. "Excuse me, what are you doing with my mailbox?" I called out. The two women turned to face me. The older one, probably in her mid-50s with severely highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her name tag read, Brenda Patterson, HOA President. The other woman, younger and clearly uncomfortable with the situation, stood back with a clipboard. "Mr. Vance, good morning," Brenda said in a voice that sounded like she gargled with gravel. "We are removing your non-conforming mailbox. You should have received a notice about this 3 weeks ago." "I never received any notice," I said, setting my coffee mug down on the driveway. "And what do you mean non-conforming? This mailbox was already here when I moved in." Brenda pulled out her phone and tapped through a few screens. "According to our records, we sent you 3 written notices via certified mail. The mailbox is painted black, which violates Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws. All mailboxes must be forest green with white trim to maintain neighborhood aesthetic standards." I felt my jaw tighten. I never got any certified mail, and nobody told me anything about green mailboxes when I signed my closing papers. "That is not our responsibility," Brenda said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "The HOA bylaws are available on our website and were included in your closing documents. Ignorance of the rules does not exempt you from following them." The younger woman with the clipboard shifted her weight from foot to foot. Her name tag said, Jennifer Mills, HOA Secretary. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. "So you're just going to take my mailbox?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Where am I supposed to receive my mail?" "You have 48 hours to install a conforming mailbox," Brenda said. "We have a list of approved vendors on our website. Until then, your mail will be held at the post office. You can pick it up with valid identification." "This is insane," I said. "You cannot just take someone's mailbox." "Actually, according to Section 12.5 of the HOA bylaws, we can remove any non-conforming structures after proper notice has been given," Brenda said, clearly enjoying this. "We have followed all proper procedures. If you have an issue with this, you can file a formal complaint and present it at next month's HOA meeting." I watched as they secured my mailbox in the truck bed with a bungee cord. The whole situation felt surreal, like I had woken up in some bizarre alternate reality where mailbox theft was legal. "I want my mailbox back," I said, "right now." "That is not going to happen," Brenda replied. "The mailbox has been confiscated and will be disposed of. Have a pleasant day, Mr. Vance." They climbed into the truck and drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway in bare feet, watching my mailbox disappear down the street. I stood there for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. Then I pulled out my phone and started doing research. It took me about 15 minutes of Googling to discover something very interesting. According to Title 18, United States Code, Section 1705, it is a federal crime to tamper with mailboxes. The law states that whoever willfully or maliciously injures, tears down, or destroys any letterbox or other receptacle intended for the receipt or delivery of mail can be fined or imprisoned. And according to the United States Postal Service regulations, mailboxes are considered federal property once they are installed and in use for mail delivery. I called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher sounded skeptical, but said she would send an officer to take a report. While I waited, I called the local post office and spoke with the postmaster, a man named Donald Chen, who sounded equally surprised by what the HOA had done. "That is a federal offense," Donald said slowly. "The HOA cannot remove a mailbox that is in active use. They certainly cannot confiscate it. The proper procedure would be to contact the Postal Service and request a change, but even then, they would need your consent." "What should I do?" I asked. "File a report with the postal inspectors," Donald said. "This falls under their jurisdiction, and you should probably contact a lawyer. HOAs cannot supersede federal law." Officer Martinez showed up about 30 minutes later. He was a stocky guy in his early 40s with a neat mustache and tired eyes. I explained the entire situation while he took notes. "Do you have any documentation of the HOA bylaws that mention mailbox requirements?" he asked. I pulled up the HOA website on my phone and showed him Section 7.3. Sure enough, it stated that all mailboxes must be forest green with white trim. But nowhere did it say the HOA had the right to physically remove non-conforming mailboxes. "And you never received any notices about this?" Officer Martinez asked. "Nothing," I said. "I check my mail every day. I never got anything certified or otherwise about my mailbox being a problem." He scratched his chin. "The issue here is that mailbox tampering falls under federal jurisdiction. I can file a report, but you need to contact the United States Postal Inspection Service. They handle crimes involving the mail system." "Can you at least make them give my mailbox back?" I asked. "Not without a court order," he said. "But I would definitely recommend you contact a lawyer. What they did might violate several laws, not just federal ones." After Officer Martinez left, I sat down at my kitchen table and made a list of everything I needed to do. First, file a report with the postal inspectors. Second, find a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Third, document everything that had happened. I took photos of where my mailbox used to be, including the holes in the ground where the post had been cemented in. I took screenshots of the HOA website and saved copies of all my closing documents. Then, I went through every piece of mail I'd received since moving in. No certified letters from the HOA. No notices about non-conforming mailboxes. Nothing. Either they had never sent them, or someone was lying about the delivery. I called my real estate agent, a friendly woman named Gloria Rodriguez, who had helped me find the house. She sounded shocked when I explained what had happened. "That is completely out of line," Gloria said. "I have been selling homes in Scottsdale for 15 years, and I have never heard of an HOA physically removing someone's mailbox. Let me make some calls. I know a good lawyer who handles HOA cases." She called me back 20 minutes later with the name and number of an attorney named Marcus Webb. I called his office immediately and was told he could see me the next morning at 9. The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I filed a report with the United States Postal Inspection Service through their online portal, detailing exactly what had happened. I sent them photos and documentation. I received an automated response saying an inspector would contact me within 3 to 5 business days. I also decided to check with my neighbors to see if anyone else had received notices about mailboxes. My next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Robert Chen, who had lived in the neighborhood for 12 years, was shocked when I told him what happened. "They took your whole mailbox?" Robert asked, leaning on his walker. "That is theft. I've had the same mailbox since I moved in here, and nobody has ever said anything about it." I looked at Robert's mailbox. It was black, just like mine had been. "According to the HOA, all mailboxes are supposed to be forest green with white trim," I said. Robert snorted. "That is new. When I moved in, the rules said mailboxes had to be either black or bronze. They keep changing these rules every few years, but they have never enforced them like this." That was interesting information. I asked Robert if he would be willing to provide a statement from my lawyer, and he agreed without hesitation. I spent the evening going door to door, talking to neighbors. Out of the 20 houses on my street, only 3 had forest green mailboxes. Everyone else had black, bronze, white, or even decorative brick structures. Nobody had received notices about non-conforming mailboxes. Several people told me they had lived there for years with the same mailboxes and had never had problems. A woman named Patricia Anderson, who lived 3 houses down, was particularly helpful. She had been on the HOA board 2 years ago and resigned because of conflicts with Brenda Patterson. Brenda has been trying to assert her authority since she became president, Patricia told me, standing in her driveway with her arms crossed. She makes up rules and enforces them selectively. Last year, she tried to fine everyone who did not have their garage doors closed at all times, even though that was not in the bylaws. We had to vote her down at the general meeting. Why would she target my mailbox specifically? I asked. Patricia glanced up and down the street before answering. Are you the one who spoke up at the last community meeting about the special assessment fees? I was surprised she knew about that. At the previous month's HOA meeting, Brenda had proposed a special assessment of $5,000 per household to renovate the community pool area. I had questioned the necessity of the expense and asked to see detailed cost breakdowns. Several other homeowners had supported my request. Brenda had not been happy about it, but she had agreed to provide the information. The vote had been postponed until the next meeting. You think she is retaliating against me? I asked. Patricia raised her eyebrows. Brenda does not like being questioned. I'm not saying that is definitely what is happening, but the timing is interesting. I thanked Patricia for her time and headed home. My mind was racing. If this was retaliation for speaking up at a meeting, then Brenda Patterson had made a serious mistake. Not only had she committed what appeared to be a federal crime, but she had also potentially opened herself and the HOA up to a lawsuit. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about my mailbox sitting in the back of that truck, probably in a landfill somewhere by now. The whole thing was so petty and absurd, but it was also genuinely enraging. I had worked hard to buy this house, and I was not about to let some power-hungry HOA president push me around. The next morning, I arrived at Marcus Webb's office 15 minutes early. His practice was located in a modest building near Old Town Scottsdale, sharing space with a dentist and an accountant. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and outdated magazines, but it felt professional enough. Marcus Webb turned out to be a tall, lean man in his late 30s with prematurely gray hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and no tie. We shook hands, and he gestured for me to sit down across from his desk. Gloria tells me you are having HOA problems, Marcus said, opening a yellow legal pad. I spent the next 45 minutes telling him everything that had happened, from the mailbox removal to my conversations with neighbors, to the information Patricia had given me about Brenda's history of power plays. Marcus took careful notes and asked clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and tapped his pen against the legal pad. Okay, so here's where we stand, Marcus said. First, the HOA violated federal law by removing your mailbox. Title 18, Section 1705 is very clear about this. Mailboxes are protected under federal law once they are in active use for mail delivery. The HOA does not have the authority to override federal law regardless of what their bylaws say. So I can get my mailbox back? I asked. Probably not the physical mailbox since they have likely destroyed it by now, Marcus said. But you can definitely sue for damages and force them to acknowledge they acted illegally. More importantly, we can use this as leverage to prevent them from taking similar actions in the future. What about the fact that I never received any notices? I asked. That is actually huge, Marcus said, leaning forward. If they claim they sent you certified mail and you never received it, there should be records. Certified mail requires a signature upon delivery. We can subpoena those records. If the records do not exist or show the mail was never delivered, then the HOA violated their own procedures in addition to federal law. Patricia Anderson mentioned that Brenda Patterson might be retaliating against me for questioning the special assessment, I said. Could we prove that? Marcus nodded slowly. That would be more difficult, but if we can establish a pattern of selective enforcement, we might have a case. The fact that you are the only one on your street who had their mailbox removed, despite multiple other non-conforming mailboxes, suggests selective enforcement. Combined with the timing after you questioned her at the meeting, we might be able to argue retaliation. What is our next step? I asked. On EFRA, I am going to draft a cease and desist letter to the HOA and Brenda Patterson personally, Marcus said. I'm going to outline all the laws they violated and demand that they cease any further harassment or enforcement actions against you. I am also going to request copies of all notices they claim to have sent you, including certified mail receipts. If they cannot produce those, we have them on procedural violations." "What if they ignore the letter?" I asked. "Then we file a lawsuit," Marcus said simply. "We sue the HOA and Brenda Patterson personally for violating federal law, harassment, and selective enforcement. We also file a complaint with the postal inspectors, which you have already done. Federal investigators take mailbox tampering very seriously. This is not some minor civil dispute anymore. They committed a federal crime." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked. Marcus quoted me a retainer fee that made me wince, but it was not unreasonable. I agreed to his terms, and we spent another 30 minutes going over details and signing paperwork. By the time I left his office, I felt significantly better about the situation. 2 days later, Marcus sent me a copy of the cease and desist letter he had sent to the HOA. It was 3 pages of dense legal language that basically said the HOA had violated federal law, committed theft, and needed to knock it off immediately or face serious consequences. He sent copies to Brenda Patterson, the HOA's registered agent, and their attorney. The response came faster than I expected. The HOA's lawyer, a man named Gerald Thompson, called Marcus the same day he received the letter. Marcus called me afterward to fill me in. "He is trying to downplay the whole thing," Marcus said. "He claims it was a misunderstanding and that the HOA was simply trying to enforce their bylaws. I told him that enforcing bylaws does not give them the right to violate federal law. He got very quiet after that." "What did he say?" I asked. "He asked if you would be willing to settle," Marcus said. I told him we would consider a settlement if it included a written apology, full reimbursement for the mailbox and installation costs, a guarantee that no further enforcement actions would be taken against you, and a policy change prohibiting the HOA from physically removing mailboxes in the future. "What did he say to that?" I asked. "He said too." "He said he would discuss it with his client and get back to me," Marcus said. "My guess is they are realizing how much trouble they are in. If the postal inspectors get involved in press charges, Brenda Patterson could face federal criminal charges. That is not something they want." I had to install a new mailbox in the meantime. I went to Home Depot and bought a standard black mailbox identical to the one that had been taken. I deliberately chose black instead of forest green. If the HOA wanted to make an issue of it, I was ready for round 2. As I was installing the mailbox, a car pulled up across the street. A man in his early 50s with a receding hairline and a polo shirt got out and walked over. His name tag identified him as Frank Morrison, HOA treasurer. "Mr. Vance, can we talk?" Frank asked, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. I straightened up from where I was mixing concrete for the mailbox post. "What about?" "I want to apologize for what happened with your mailbox," Frank said. "I was not aware Brenda was planning to do that. Several board members were not aware. When we found out, we were pretty upset." That was interesting. Internal conflict within the HOA board. "So you were saying this was all Brenda's idea?" I asked. Frank hesitated. "I cannot speak to specifics because of the legal situation, but let me just say that not everyone on the board agrees with how this was handled. There is going to be an emergency board meeting tomorrow night to discuss this situation. I wanted to let you know personally." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I have lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, Frank said. I've seen good people driven out by petty HOA nonsense, and I'm tired of it. Brenda has been pushing boundaries for too long. What she did to you might finally be the thing that gets her removed from the board." I wiped concrete off my hands. "I appreciate you telling me this, Frank. For what it is worth, I did not want this to become a big legal thing. I just wanted my mailbox left alone." "I understand," Frank said, "and I hope we can resolve this reasonably. But I wanted you to know that not everyone on the board is your enemy." After Frank left, I finished installing my new mailbox. I took photos of the entire process for documentation. Then I went inside and sent Marcus an email updating him on Frank's visit. Marcus called me back within an hour. "That's very interesting," he said. "It sounds like there is a split in the HOA board. That works in our favor. If they are willing to settle reasonably, we should consider it. Fighting this in court would take months and cost everyone a lot of money." I am open to settling if they meet our terms, I said, but I am not backing down on the policy change. They cannot be allowed to do this to other people. Agreed, Marcus said. Let me reach out to their attorney and see if we can set up a mediation. The emergency HOA board meeting happened the next night at 7. It was held in the community center, a generic beige building next to the pool area. I showed up 15 minutes early and was surprised to find the meeting room already packed. Word had apparently gotten around the neighborhood about what had happened with my mailbox, and people were angry. Patricia Anderson spotted me and waved me over to sit next to her. This should be interesting, she said. I've never seen this many people show up to a board meeting. The 7 board members filed in and took seats at the front table. Brenda Patterson sat in the center chair, looking like she had not slept in days. Her usual perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, and her expression was tight. Frank Morrison sat on the far end, deliberately not looking at her. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately tried to move into a closed executive session, which would have excluded all the homeowners from hearing the discussion. That did not go over well. "Point of order," a man in the back row shouted. "This is supposed to be an emergency meeting about the mailbox incident. The community has a right to hear this discussion." Other people started shouting in agreement. Brenda banged a gavel on the table. "Order," she called out. "This is a legal matter that needs to be discussed in executive session to protect the HOA from liability." "You should have thought about liability before you stole someone's mailbox," someone else shouted. The room erupted in arguments. I sat quietly, watching the chaos unfold. Finally, another board member, a middle-aged woman named Susan Yamamoto, leaned over and said something to Brenda. Brenda's face went red, but she nodded. "Fine," Brenda said. "We will discuss this in open session, but I want everyone to know that this is highly irregular and could compromise our legal position." Frank Morrison spoke up. "I move that we acknowledge the HOA made an error in removing Mr. Vance's mailbox and that we work toward a reasonable resolution." "Second," Susan Yamamoto said immediately. Brenda glared at both of them. "We followed proper procedure. Mr. Vance received 3 certified notices about his non-conforming mailbox. He ignored them. The HOA had no choice but to take action." "Then produce the certified mail receipts," Frank said. "Show us proof that the notices were delivered." Brenda shuffled through a folder in front of her. "I have them right here." She pulled out 3 pieces of paper and held them up. Frank stood and walked over, taking them from her hand. He studied them for a long moment, then looked up at Brenda with an expression I could not quite read. "These are not certified mail receipts," Frank said slowly. "These are regular mail tracking numbers. There is no signature confirmation. There is no proof these were ever delivered to Mr. Vance." The room went silent. Brenda's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "They were sent certified," Brenda insisted. "The post office must have lost the confirmation records." "That's not how certified mail works," Frank said. "And even if these had been delivered, which they clearly were not, that still does not give the HOA the right to physically remove someone's mailbox. We violated federal law." Another board member, a younger man named David Park, spoke up. "I was not aware we were planning to remove Mr. Vance's mailbox. Brenda, did you get board approval for this action?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "It was within my authority as president to enforce the bylaws." "That is not what I asked," David said. "Did you get board approval?" "No," Brenda admitted, "but Section 15.2 of the bylaws gives the president authority to take immediate action on violations." "Immediate action in case of emergencies." Susan Yamamoto cut in. "A black mailbox is not an emergency. You should have brought this to the board for a vote before taking such a drastic action." I watched as the board members turned on Brenda one by one. It was clear that she had acted unilaterally, probably thinking she could get away with it, but she had miscalculated badly. Frank Morrison made another motion. "I move that the HOA formally apologize to Mr. Vance, reimburse him for all costs associated with replacing his mailbox, and agree to a policy that prohibits the physical removal of mailboxes without homeowner consent and proper legal procedures." "Second," Susan said. "All in favor?" Frank asked. 6 hands went up. Only Brenda abstained, sitting with her arms crossed and her face set in a furious scowl. "Motion passes," Frank said. He looked at me. "Mr. Vance, on behalf of the HOA board, I sincerely apologize for what happened. This should never have occurred. We will work with your attorney to formalize a settlement agreement." The room broke into applause. I stood and nodded my thanks, feeling a mixture of relief and vindication. After the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the HOA. Patricia Anderson gave me a hug and whispered, "You just did this whole neighborhood a huge favor." As I was walking to my car, I noticed Brenda standing by her vehicle, talking angrily on her phone. She saw me looking and glared with such intensity that I almost laughed. She had tried to bully me over a mailbox and ended up humiliating herself in front of the entire community. But the story was not over yet. 3 days after the board meeting, I got a call from a postal inspector and named Agent Sarah Mitchell. She wanted to meet with me to discuss the mailbox incident. Agent Mitchell turned out to be a professional woman in her early 40s with short dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. We met at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, and I walked her through everything that had happened. "So the HOA president physically removed your mailbox without your consent," Agent Mitchell said, taking notes on a tablet, "and she claimed to have sent you certified notices that you never received." "Correct," I said, "and it turned out at the board meeting that she never actually sent certified mail. She just had regular tracking numbers with no delivery confirmation." Agent Mitchell's eyebrows went up. "That's interesting. So she lied about following proper procedures." "Apparently," I said. "Mr. Vance, I need to be clear with you about something," Agent Mitchell said. "Tampering with mailboxes is a federal crime. We take these cases seriously because mailboxes are essential infrastructure for the postal system. If someone is removing mailboxes, even with claimed good intentions, they are interfering with mail delivery." "I understand," I said. "I just want to make sure this does not happen to anyone else." "We are going to investigate this fully," Agent Mitchell said. "I will need to interview the HOA president and the other person who helped her remove the mailbox. I will also need to see any documentation they have about their policies and procedures." Over the next 2 weeks, Agent Mitchell conducted her investigation. She interviewed Brenda Patterson, Jennifer Mills, and several board members. She reviewed HOA documents and bylaws. She checked with the post office to confirm that my mailbox had been in active use for mail delivery. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb was negotiating a settlement agreement with the HOA's attorney. The HOA agreed to reimburse me $800 for the cost of the new mailbox and installation, provide a written apology, and implement a new policy prohibiting the physical removal of mailboxes without homeowner consent. They also agreed to audit all their enforcement procedures to ensure compliance with federal and state laws. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Agent Mitchell called me 4 weeks after our initial meeting. "Mr. Vance, I wanted to update you on our investigation. We have concluded that Mrs. Patterson violated federal law by removing your mailbox. We are referring the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for possible prosecution." I sat down heavily on my couch. "You're going to press charges?" "That is not my decision," Agent Mitchell said. "But yes, we are recommending prosecution. This was not an innocent mistake. Mrs. Patterson deliberately removed a mailbox that was in active use for mail delivery. She lied about sending proper notices, and our investigation found that she has done this before." "She has?" I asked, surprised. 2 years ago, she ordered the removal of another resident's mailbox," Agent Mitchell said. "That resident moved out of the neighborhood before pursuing legal action. We spoke with them during our investigation, and they confirmed that Mrs. Patterson never sent them proper notices either." I felt a chill run down my spine. Brenda Patterson had been getting away with this behavior for years, and nobody had called her on it until now. "What happens next?" I asked. "The U.S. Attorney's Office will review our findings and decide whether to file charges," Agent Mitchell said. "If they do, Mrs. Patterson will be charged with mailbox tampering under Title 18, Section 1705. The maximum penalty is a fine of up to $250,000 and up to 3 years in prison." 3 years? I said, shocked. "Federal crimes are prosecuted seriously," Agent Mitchell said. "Now, I doubt she will get the maximum sentence, especially if she has no prior criminal record, but she will face consequences." 2 months later, I received a notification that Brenda Patterson had been formally charged with 1 count of mailbox tampering. The case made local news, and suddenly, my quiet little mailbox dispute became a story about HOA overreach in federal law. A reporter from the local ABC affiliate contacted me for an interview. I agreed, figuring it might help other people dealing with similar HOA problems. The segment aired on the evening news, showing footage of my new mailbox and an interview with me explaining what had happened. The HOA claimed my black mailbox was non-conforming and removed it without my permission, I said on camera. What they did not realize is that mailboxes are protected under federal law. You cannot just take someone's mailbox, even if you are the HOA president. The story got picked up by other local media outlets and eventually went viral on social media. I started receiving messages from people all over the country who had dealt with similar HOA harassment. Some of the stories were shocking. People being fined thousands of dollars for minor violations, having their property seized, being foreclosed on for unpaid HOA fees. I realized that my situation, as frustrating as it had been, was relatively mild compared to what some people experienced. But it had exposed a larger problem with how some HOAs operated. They wielded significant power over homeowners with very little oversight or accountability. The Saguaro Springs HOA held a special election to recall Brenda Patterson from the board. She resigned before the vote could take place. Frank Morrison was elected as the new president, and one of his first acts was to establish a homeowner committee to review all HOA enforcement policies and ensure they complied with federal and state laws. Brenda's criminal case moved slowly through the federal court system. Her attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president and had no criminal intent. The judge was not persuaded. Federal law protecting mailboxes exists for a reason, the judge said during a hearing I attended. The defendant cannot claim ignorance of federal law, nor can she claim that HOA bylaws supersede federal statutes. The evidence clearly shows she removed a mailbox that was in active use for mail delivery without the homeowner's consent. That is the definition of the crime she is charged with. 10 months after my mailbox was first taken, Brenda Patterson stood before a federal judge for sentencing. She had pleaded guilty to 1 count of mailbox tampering as part of a plea agreement. The prosecutor recommended a sentence of 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $5,000. The judge accepted the recommendation but added his own commentary. "Mrs. Patterson, you held a position of trust in your community," the judge said. "Residents relied on you to enforce HOA rules fairly and lawfully. Instead, you abused that position to harass a homeowner who had the audacity to question your authority. You violated federal law, and you lied about following proper procedures. This is serious misconduct." Brenda stood with her head bowed, her attorney beside her. She looked like she had aged 10 years since I first saw her taking my mailbox. "I am sentencing you to 6 months probation," the judge continued. "During that time, you will complete 200 hours of community service, preferably with an organization that helps homeowners deal with HOA disputes. You will pay a fine of $5,000, and you are prohibited from serving on any HOA board for 5 years. The courtroom was silent as the judge finished speaking. Brenda nodded without looking up. "I hope you have learned something from this experience," the judge said. "HOAs serve an important function in maintaining communities, but that does not give their leaders unlimited power. Everyone must follow the law, including federal law." Dismissed. I walked out of the courthouse feeling a strange mixture of emotions. I had never wanted to destroy Brenda's life. I just wanted my mailbox left alone. But she had made choices that led to this outcome. She could have apologized and replaced my mailbox immediately. Instead, she had doubled down, lied about procedures, and forced the situation to escalate. The story got one final round of media coverage when Brenda's sentencing was announced. The local news did a follow-up segment showing my perfectly maintained black mailbox and interviewing me about the outcome. "I am glad justice was served," I told the reporter. "But more importantly, I hope this sends a message to other HOAs that they cannot ignore federal law. Homeowners have rights, and those rights need to be respected." Life gradually returned to normal in Saguaro Springs. Frank Morrison turned out to be an excellent HOA president who actually listened to residents and made reasonable decisions. The new enforcement policies were fair and transparent. Several other homeowners came forward with complaints about Brenda's past behavior, and the board worked to address those issues. I kept my black mailbox. Nobody ever said another word about it being non-conforming. In fact, several neighbors painted their mailboxes black in solidarity. The whole mailbox color requirement quietly disappeared from the HOA bylaws during the next revision. A year after the incident, I was working in my garage when Patricia Anderson stopped by with a plate of cookies. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did," Patricia said. "The neighborhood is so much better now. Frank is doing a great job, and people actually want to serve on the HOA board now instead of dreading it." "I'm glad it worked out," I said, accepting the cookies. Though I really did not set out to become the neighborhood hero. I just wanted my mailbox back. Patricia laughed. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions. You stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to just comply. That took courage." After she left, I thought about her words. She was right in a way. It would have been easier to just buy a green mailbox and move on with my life. But something about the injustice of having my property seized over something so trivial had gotten under my skin. I could not let it go. And in standing up for myself, I'd accidentally helped the entire neighborhood. Brenda's removal from the board had created space for better leadership. The new enforcement policies protected everyone from similar harassment. Other homeowners felt empowered to question unreasonable HOA demands. I still live in Saguaro Springs. My black mailbox stands proudly at the end of my driveway, a daily reminder that sometimes you have to fight for your rights, even over something as seemingly insignificant as a mailbox. Federal law protects those mailboxes for a reason. They are essential infrastructure, and nobody, not even an HOA president, has the right to tamper with them. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, document everything when dealing with an HOA. Take photos, save emails, keep records. You never know when you might need evidence. Second, know your rights. HOA bylaws are not law. They cannot override federal or state statutes. Third, do not be afraid to stand up to bullies, even when they have official titles and authority. And finally, sometimes the most important battles are fought over small things. A mailbox might seem trivial, but the principle behind it mattered. If HOAs can seize your mailbox today, what will they try to take tomorrow? Drawing a line and saying this far and no further is essential. Frank Morrison occasionally stops by to chat about neighborhood issues. He told me recently that several other Arizona HOAs had updated their enforcement policies after hearing about what happened in Saguaro Springs. The story had spread through HOA management circles as a cautionary tale about the dangers of overreach. "You probably prevented a lot of future headaches for homeowners across the state," Frank said. "Nobody wants to be the next Brenda Patterson facing federal charges over HOA enforcement." I never wanted to be famous for having my mailbox stolen. But if my experience helps other people stand up to unreasonable HOA demands, then maybe something good came out of it. My mail arrives every day in my black mailbox. I check it each afternoon, pulling out bills and catalogs and the occasional handwritten letter. It is such a mundane routine that most people never think about it. But I notice it now. I appreciate the simple fact that my mail gets delivered to a mailbox that nobody has the right to take away. Sometimes I see new residents moving into the neighborhood, and I make a point to introduce myself and welcome them. If they seem worried about HOA rules, I tell them not to stress too much. The current board is reasonable and fair. But I also tell them to read the bylaws carefully, document any issues, and never be afraid to question things that do not make sense. And if anyone ever tries to take your mailbox, I say with a smile, call a lawyer immediately. That's a federal crime. They usually laugh, thinking I'm joking. Then I tell them the whole story, and their eyes get wide with disbelief. By the time I finish, they understand that HOA disputes can escalate quickly, but they can also be won if you stand your ground and know your rights. The community center where that dramatic board meeting took place is now used for much more pleasant gatherings. Block parties, holiday celebrations, community yard sales. The atmosphere in Saguaro Springs has changed dramatically. People feel like they live in a neighborhood again, not a dictatorship. I even served on the HOA board myself for a one-year term. Frank asked me to fill a vacant position, and I figured I owed it to the community to help make sure things kept running smoothly. It gave me a new appreciation for how much work goes into managing a neighborhood, but it also confirmed my belief that HOAs work best when they focus on maintaining common areas and handling genuine problems, not harassing residents over trivial matters. My term on the board ended 6 months ago. I did not run for re-election. I had served my time and wanted to get back to just being a regular homeowner. But I stay informed about board decisions and attend meetings when important issues are being discussed. The lawsuit settlement money I received from the HOA mostly went to paying Marcus Webb's legal fees, but I had enough left over to take a nice vacation to Colorado. I stood on a mountain trail, breathing in crisp air and looking at spectacular views, and I thought about how strange life can be. A year and a half ago, I was standing in my driveway watching someone steal my mailbox. Now, I was hiking in the Rockies, having accidentally become a minor local celebrity for defending mailbox rights. When I got back from vacation, there was a thick envelope in my mailbox. It was from the United States Postal Inspection Service. Inside was a formal letter thanking me for my cooperation in their investigation and a certificate of appreciation for helping protect the integrity of the mail system. I framed the certificate and hung it in my home office, right above my desk where I can see it every day. It is a reminder that ordinary people can make a difference when they stand up for what is right, even in the face of intimidation and bureaucratic nonsense. The mailbox that started this whole saga sits in my garage now. I retrieved it from the evidence locker after Brenda's case was closed. It is dented and scratched from being hauled away in that truck, but I kept it as a memento. Sometimes I look at it and shake my head at the absurdity of everything that happened. A mailbox, the whole federal case, the media coverage, the neighborhood drama, all because of a mailbox. But it was never really about the mailbox, was it? It was about respect and boundaries and the rule of law. It was about refusing to be bullied by someone who thought their position gave them unlimited authority. It was about protecting not just my rights, but the rights of everyone in the community. I learned that federal law exists to protect ordinary citizens from exactly this kind of abuse. Mailboxes are federally protected because mail delivery is essential to functioning society. When Congress passed laws making it a federal crime to tamper with mailboxes, they were thinking about situations exactly like mine. They understood that mailboxes needed protection from local authorities who might try to use them as tools for harassment or control. Brenda Patterson learned that lesson the hard way. Her probation is finished now, but she will carry a federal conviction on her record for the rest of her life. She moved out of Saguaro Springs about 6 months after her sentencing. I heard she relocated to a different part of Phoenix. I hope she learned from this experience and found some peace. I bear her no ill will at this point. She made mistakes, faced consequences, and hopefully grew as a person. That is all anyone can ask. The neighborhood continues to thrive. Property values have actually increased since the HOA leadership changed, probably because people want to live in a community where the HOA is reasonable rather than tyrannical. Houses sell quickly when they come on the market, and new residents consistently report being happy with the neighborhood atmosphere. My own house has become something of a landmark. Tour guides for prospective buyers sometimes point it out as the house from the mailbox case. Real estate agents use my story as an example of how the HOA changed for the better. I find it both amusing and slightly embarrassing. Last week, I was interviewed by a law student writing a paper about HOA disputes in federal law. She asked me if I would have handled anything differently, knowing what I know now. I thought about it carefully before answering. No, I said finally. I would do exactly the same thing. Maybe I would have contacted a lawyer even sooner, but otherwise, I stand by every decision I made. Sometimes you have to fight for your rights, even when it is uncomfortable or expensive or time-consuming. Because if you do not, who will? The law student nodded thoughtfully and scribbled in her notebook. She thanked me for my time and promised to send me a copy of her paper when it was finished. After she left, I walked outside to check my mail. The Arizona sun beat down on the concrete, and heat waves shimmered off the parked cars lining the street. My black mailbox stood at the end of the driveway, solid and unmovable, exactly where it belonged. I opened it and pulled out a stack of envelopes and a magazine. As I sorted through them, I noticed one of my new neighbors walking by with her dog. She waved, and I waved back. "Nice mailbox," she called out with a grin. "Thanks," I said. "It is federally protected." She laughed and continued her walk. I headed back inside with my mail, smiling to myself. Just another ordinary day in Saguaro Springs, where the HOA follows the rules, the neighbors look out for each other, and the mailboxes stand unmolested at the end of every driveway, exactly as it should be. The story could have ended so differently. If I had not done my research and discovered the federal law protecting mailboxes, I might have just bought a green mailbox and grumbled about HOA overreach. If Marcus Webb had not been such a skilled attorney, we might not have achieved such a comprehensive settlement. If Agent Mitchell had not taken the case seriously, there might have been no investigation and no consequences for Brenda's actions. But all those pieces fell into place at the right time, and justice prevailed. Not perfectly, perhaps, and not without cost, but prevailed nonetheless. I think about other homeowners dealing with similar issues across the country. People facing foreclosure over unpaid HOA fees. People being fined hundreds of dollars for leaving their trash cans out too long. People having liens placed on their homes for painting their front door the wrong color. HOAs serve a legitimate purpose in maintaining property values and community standards, but they need oversight and accountability. They need board members who understand that their power comes with responsibility and limits. They need to follow not just their own bylaws, but federal and state laws that supersede those bylaws. My case became a small part of a larger conversation about HOA reform. Several state legislators in Arizona have proposed bills to increase oversight of HOAs and protect homeowner rights. I testified at a committee hearing, sharing my story and advocating for stronger protections. Whether those bills will pass remains to be seen. Politics moves slowly, and there are powerful interests invested in maintaining the status quo. But at least the conversation is happening. People are paying attention to HOA abuses in ways they were not before. And it all started with a mailbox. I finished this reflection sitting on my back patio, watching the sunset over the Arizona desert. The sky turns brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the temperature finally starts to drop from its daytime high. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howls. My mailbox stands guard at the end of my driveway, a silent sentinel protecting my right to receive mail. It is just a metal box on a post, but it represents something larger. It represents the principle that laws apply equally to everyone, even HOA presidents. It represents the idea that ordinary citizens can fight back against bullies and win. It represents the truth that sometimes the smallest battles matter most. I raise my glass of iced tea in a silent toast to mailboxes everywhere, to federal laws that protect them, and to everyone who has ever had to stand up to an HOA and say, "Enough is enough." The fight is worth it. Your rights are worth defending. And no HOA president, no matter how power-hungry or self-important, has the authority to take away your federally protected mailbox. That is not just a legal principle. That is justice.